Gentleman yields back. I now recognize the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Ogles, for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the witnesses, I believe strongly in federalism, fiscal responsibility, and the importance of empowering local communities and not expanding the bureaucracies of, quite frankly, the federal government. As we assess the state and local cybersecurity grant program, we need to ensure that our limited federal resources are being used effectively and are actually reaching the communities most at risk. And I say that in the context of being a former county executive in Tennessee, serves as the CEO of the county. And so I can attest to the fact that some of these pass-through grants administered by the states were incredibly important to my county, which was a rural county. Emergency services, fire, and cyber were all my departments. And so again, and I get your perspective on the stable match because again, as a rural county where we have limited funding mechanisms and quite frankly, an ever-growing school system, there's a friction there of how do you fund these mechanisms, which as my colleague stated, the future of warfare is on the cyber battlefield. But that being said, Mr. Huber, you've worked to secure systems against the threat from Volt Typhoon, a CCP-backed group of hackers who both have sophisticated abilities and specialize in targeting the most vulnerable points in its target systems. In your testimony, you mentioned their attack on Littleton Electric Light and Water Department in Massachusetts. In my district and across the country, we have a diverse range of electric providers, large corporations, rural providers, as I mentioned. In your experience, how strong is the awareness of cyber threats among smaller, less resource organizations that provide critical infrastructure? And again, I go back to Tennessee, but probably much like rural Kentucky, where we have a patchwork of these smaller communities where we're scrapping for resources to figure out how do we, quite frankly, protect not only our infrastructure, but our citizens, sir.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I've had the pleasure of working with municipalities that the IT person was the IT person and the database administrator and the system administrator and responsible for security as a part-time job. So as you might imagine, any administrative burden that might be involved in applying for the grant would be significant for an entity such as that, smaller size, but make no mistake, those smaller rural entities, that could be the hydro station that fuels a larger municipality. Mm-hmm. That's a national security and an economic impact to the region. So as we heard from gentlemen here, education and awareness is key to educating those folks who have probably dual roles or multi-hat roles for protecting that piece of critical infrastructure from nation-state attackers. As someone who's been in the trenches and a National Guard member in Title 32 and state active duty supporting state critical infrastructure components, there's a significant shortage of resources and knowledge about nation-state level attackers. So I think it's important to recognize that this funding is key in raising the bar of foundational cyber controls for all of those entities.
And I want to focus primarily with the other three witnesses on rural communities. And one of my concerns, again, my background coming from a rural community, is that competition that you see between, say, a Nashville and my community. But yet, from an assessment standpoint, I would argue some of your rural communities are your most vulnerable points of entry. So how do we make sure that we're prioritizing, basically, and take size out of it for a moment, but a needs assessment, understanding that, again, whether it's distribution of broadband, whether it's protecting points of entry, et cetera. Mr. Fuller?
Thank you very much. Let me just say, I really appreciate your comment that these attacks are very much like war. And this committee knows very well that we live in a very, very dangerous world, that we're constantly under attack, including our smallest and most rural communities. So with the program that we rolled out tools to all of our communities, including the rural communities. And for the most rural who don't even have sufficient IT resources, we're able to make resources available to help them install those tools. And then we're also able to provide training for those people. So we're absolutely committed to getting this program to our small cities and counties and special districts.
Mr. Kramer?
Thank you. Again, it's a great question. I think one of the things that we need to recognize, it's a matter of how quickly we share that information as well. When a cyber attack happens, what they're trying to do in one place, one community, is likely happening somewhere else. And again, I think that smaller communities, the rural communities where my colleagues have testified that you've got a person who has 3 different jobs. If they aren't aware of what to look for, it makes it much more difficult. They often don't find out until it's too late. So one of the things we're hoping we can get the federal government to do is recognize that they collect up a lot of this data about cyber attacks, but they collect it up and hold it. It would be very useful to us at the local level if as soon as they knew about a cyber attack, they shared that information with entities as quickly as they could so that folks at the local level could start looking at their own systems and see if someone's trying to get in the same way.
Yes, sir, and I'm out of time, but Mr. Raymond, a final thought?
I would just say that we view cybersecurity as a team sport. We view those that are better resourced in a good position to help those that aren't. So we do have municipalities who help each other, larger ones helping smaller ones, and smaller ones who are relying upon the state to help deliver services. We do run all of the network services, so it provides a unique ability for us to provide specialized security services to everyone in our jurisdiction, which is one way to make the limited dollars we have go a lot further.
Sir, thank you to the witness, Mr. Chairman. Apologies for going over.
No, of course, not a problem.